If you've ever seen two kids argue over who gets the last chicken nugget, congratulations, you've already witnessed a more rational debate than what went down in this courtroom. The star of today's episode, a self-certified Karen with an ego bigger than a HOA's rule book, decided to sue her elderly neighbor over a fence. And not just any fence, but a fence she didn't even own. Yes, you heard that right. This was a lawsuit over property that legally, and quite obviously, was never hers in the first place. It's like marching into Walmart, pointing at a random shopping cart and declaring, "This is mine now because it looks like one I used 5 years ago." Bold strategy, Karen. Bold strategy. So here's the scene. Grandma, who has lived in her home for over 3 decades, has a fence that's older than most TikTok users. It's been standing there through rain, wind, nosy neighbors, and at least 3 seasons of The Bachelor. She and her late husband even dropped $4,000 back in the day to have it installed and then personally maintained it for 30 years. That's 3 decades of hammering nails, patching up rotten posts, and even hiring help when storms nearly flattened it. This isn't just a fence, it's basically our third child. But along comes Karen, a woman whose superpower is detecting microscopic imperfections and blowing them up into federal crimes. One glance at Grandma's fence, and Karen suddenly becomes a self-proclaimed fence expert, claiming, without any evidence, that the design wasn't the same as hers. Cue the dramatic music. To Karen, this wasn't just wood and nails. Oh no, this was Exhibit A in her grand case of how to waste a court's time in 10 easy steps. Here's the irony. Even if the fence design was different, so what? It wasn't her fence. It's like arguing with your neighbor that their car looks too much like yours and then demanding partial custody of the keys. Imagine someone suing you because your Honda Civic dared to have the same paint color as theirs. That's the level of logic we're dealing with here. But wait, it gets better. Karen doesn't just claim the fence isn't the same. She doubles down, insisting that this somehow entitles her to control over it. Picture it, a 67-year-old grandma who has owned, paid for, and repaired this fence for 30 years, suddenly being told by her neighbor, "Actually, sweetie, this fence is mine now because I said so." If absurdity had a brand ambassador, Karen just secured the sponsorship deal. Let's pause for a second and think about what this says about entitlement. Most of us, when we see something isn't ours, we keep walking. Normal human behavior. Oh, that's your fence? Cool. I'll paint my own. Karen logic. That's your fence? Perfect. Let me file a lawsuit. It's as if her brain skipped the part where common sense lives and went straight to maximum drama. And the kicker? This entire dispute could have been resolved with one polite conversation. Grandma's been cordial with neighbors for years, respecting boundaries, even letting folks plant gardens up to the fence line. But Karen decided that wasn't good enough. Nope, she wanted to roll into court armed with shaky evidence and a whole lot of audacity. Because why knock on your neighbor's door when you can summon a judge instead, right? Here's what makes it truly laughable. Karen seemed to forget that in property law, ownership is kind of a big deal. You can't sue over scratches on something that doesn't belong to you. That's like calling the cops because someone spilled soda in the movie theater seat next to you. Annoying? Sure. Illegal? Not even close. Yet here we are, listening to Karen's monologue about fence design differences like she's uncovering state secrets. The judge, of course, isn't buying it. He's sitting there, probably wondering why his law degree is being used to referee what boils down to a glorified HOA squabble. And honestly, same. Courtrooms are supposed to handle real issues, property theft, fraud, maybe the occasional juicy divorce case. Instead, this poor man is stuck mediating a verbal cage match over wood planks and paint. Grandma, on the other hand, is calm, steady, the very picture of dignity under pressure. She doesn't raise her voice, doesn't twist facts. She simply explains the reality. She and her husband paid for and maintained that fence for 30 years. It's hers, period. And the truth is so painfully obvious that you almost feel secondhand embarrassment for Karen. Almost. And that, my friends, is the beauty of this saga's opening act. One entitled neighbor tried to spin a tale of fence fraud, and instead, she ended up exposing herself as the world's most dramatic amateur carpenter.
Welcome to Fact 1, where we learn that when you sue over something you don't own, the only thing you truly own is the embarrassment. But hey, if you think Karen's fence obsession was wild, wait until you see how she turned a couple of paint specks into a full-blown federal investigation. Grab your popcorn, this courtroom drama is just getting started.
If there's one thing Karen loves more than hearing herself talk, it's manufacturing drama. And boy, did she deliver. You'd think we were in the middle of a high-stakes Law and Order episode, the way she treated this fence situation. Forget petty neighbor disputes. Karen rolled into court acting like she had just cracked open a case for the FBI. Her evidence? A few drops of red paint that accidentally splashed onto her side of the fence. Yeah, that's it. Not graffiti, not vandalism, not even a Banksy piece she could auction off on eBay. Just paint specks. And when I say she treated it like a federal crime scene, I mean this woman went full CSI Backyard edition. We're talking photographs, videos, sworn testimony, from herself, of course, and enough dramatic flair to make a soap opera look subtle. She documented those paint specks like she had discovered fingerprints at a jewel heist. If there were yellow police tapes for neighbor disputes, she would have roped off the backyard and put herself in charge of investigations. Here's the kicker. The so-called damage wasn't even permanent. Grandma, or as I like to call her, the Queen of Calm, power washed it off in minutes. Gone. Vanished. Like it had never happened. If this were a video game, the problem had already been solved by pressing one button. But Karen? Oh no, that would make too much sense. Instead, she decided to treat every paint drip like evidence in a courtroom thriller. Honestly, I'm shocked she didn't try to bring in a blacklight and dust for fingerprints. Let's put this in perspective. Most of us encounter far more annoying situations on a daily basis. Starbucks barista spells your name wrong. You shrug and move on. Amazon delivers your package to the wrong door. You grab it, wave to your neighbor, and continue with life. But Karen? She sees red paint splatters on a fence and thinks, "This is it. This is my Aaron Brockovich moment." The disconnect between reality and her imagination deserves its own Netflix documentary. And the court ate it up, not because it was legitimate, but because they had no choice but to sit through her theatrics. Karen dramatically waved around photos of the fence like she was presenting exhibits in a murder trial. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, as you can clearly see, this smudge right here is undeniable proof that my neighbor has committed fence treason." Meanwhile, Grandma is sitting there like, "Sweetheart, I already washed it off. It's clean. Want me to show you the fence right now?" But no, reason doesn't work on Karen. To her, the fence wasn't just a fence, it was the front line of a neighborhood Cold War. And she was the lone soldier, bravely standing against tyranny, armed only with a camera phone and way too much free time. This brings us to a bigger point. Some people thrive on conflict. They don't want solutions, they want drama. For Karen, this wasn't about the paint at all. It was about control. She wanted to assert dominance, to remind her elderly neighbor that she wasn't just dealing with any neighbor, she was dealing with Karen. Because when your identity is built on being perpetually offended, you'll find offense in anything, even in a paint drip that disappeared faster than your New Year's resolutions. And here's the ironic cherry on top. Karen actually believed this courtroom performance was helping her case. She probably thought the judge was going to lean forward, adjust his glasses, and say, "My God, you're right. These paint specks are a crime against humanity. Court rules in your favor." Instead, you could practically see the judge calculating how many law school loans he took out just to end up refereeing adult tantrums about fences. Let's be real. Every neighbor has quirks. Maybe they mow their lawn too early, maybe their dog barks at squirrels, maybe they leave their trash can out for an extra day. But turning minor inconveniences into full-blown trials, that's a Karen specialty. Most of us have problems worth ignoring.
Karen invents problems just so she can escalate them. It's like she lives for the drama. Actually, scratch that. It's like she's producing it. If drama were a streaming service, Karen would be the CEO. And don't even get me started on how this wasted everyone's time. The court could have been handling real issues, property theft, custody battles, heck, even parking ticket disputes. Instead, they had to sit through Karen's masterclass in overreaction. Every second spent on this case was a second stolen from actual justice. That's the real crime scene here. So, there you have it. Karen turned a couple of paint specks into a personal apocalypse. She treated Grandma's backyard like it was ground zero for a national emergency, with photographic evidence and enough dramatic storytelling to rival a crime podcast. But remember, this was all just the warm-up act. Karen hadn't even unleashed her full arsenal yet. Because if suing over paint specks wasn't ridiculous enough, wait until you see what Karen did next. She weaponized small claims court like it was her own personal nuke button. And trust me, the fallout is hilarious.
At this point, you might think Karen would have taken a step back, realized she was overreacting, and maybe, just maybe, let it go. After all, we're talking about paint specks on a fence she didn't own, something Grandma had already power washed away faster than a TikTok trend disappears. But no, Karen doesn't do let it go. She does level it up. And in her world, the logical next step wasn't grabbing a mop, buying a latte, and moving on. It was dragging her 67-year-old neighbor into small claims court. That's right. Karen went full nuclear. Forget mediation, forget a calm chat over the fence, forget literally any other rational solution. She marched straight into the courthouse like she was storming the beaches of Normandy, armed with photographs, shaky arguments, and the undying belief that she was destined to win. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. Oh no, this was Karen's Super Bowl, her season finale, her magnum opus. Now, let's pause here and appreciate the sheer absurdity of this move. Small claims court is designed to resolve legitimate disputes. Maybe a contractor stiffed you. Maybe your landlord kept your deposit. Maybe someone actually damaged property you own. But Karen? She decided the system needed to hear her side of the great fence paint disaster of 2023. Imagine sitting in a courtroom where one case is about someone owed thousands of dollars in unpaid rent, and the next case is Karen versus Grandma over some paint splatters. You couldn't script comedy better than this. And let's not forget, Grandma wasn't some random pushover. She'd lived in that house for over 3 decades, maintained the fence since the early 90s, and had receipts, stories, and even a hired handyman to prove it. Karen walking into court with her shaky narrative was like bringing a butter knife to a lightsaber duel. But here's the thing. Karen didn't just want to win. She wanted the spectacle. Think about it. Why else would you blow up a minor backyard dispute into a courtroom drama? Because for Karen, the court wasn't just about justice. It was about validation. She wanted a judge, a literal person in a robe, to declare her the righteous victim of paint fence oppression. She wanted official recognition that her suffering, however imaginary, was real. And she wanted Grandma shamed in front of everyone just so she could feel victorious. This is what makes Karens dangerous. They don't just play the victim. They professionalize it. They weaponize systems designed to help people with real problems. It's like calling 911 because your Wi-Fi went down. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. But Karen never got that memo. To her, small claims court wasn't a last resort. It was her first choice, her battlefield, her personal theater of war. Now, the funniest part is how she framed it. According to Karen, this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. No, this was going to be really expensive to fix. You could almost hear the dramatic gasp. Never mind that Grandma had already cleaned it off with a power washer. Never mind that the fence wasn't even hers. No, Karen had to inflate the issue like a balloon at a kid's birthday party, except instead of clowns and cake, it was paperwork and wasted taxpayer dollars. Picture the judge for a moment.
He's sitting there, listening to Karen describe her neighbor's power washer as though it were a weapon of mass destruction. He's flipping through her photos, trying not to roll his eyes, probably wondering if he left the stove on at home. This is what his legal education has come to, refereeing a soap opera between a self-entitled neighbor and a grandmother who just wanted to keep her fence intact. Law school debt? $100,000. Years of study? Countless. Getting paid to listen to Karen cry about paint specks? Priceless. Meanwhile, Grandma shows up not with drama, but with dignity. She calmly explains that she and her husband built the fence, maintained it, repaired it, and owned it outright. No theatrics, no exaggerations, no nonsense. Just facts. You could almost hear the courtroom sigh of relief every time Grandma spoke, like, finally, an adult in the room. But Karen, she couldn't help herself. Even in court, she escalated the drama at every turn. She framed herself as the hero of her own story, the lone voice of justice in a cruel world where neighbors dare to paint fences without her permission. If you squint hard enough, you can almost see the imaginary cape she must have worn into the courthouse, convinced she was fighting the good fight. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. This is the essence of Karen logic. When you don't get your way, you don't compromise, you sue. And when you sue, you don't sue over something important, you sue over something petty, because petty is the fuel that keeps the Karen engine running. And so we arrive at the climax of Fact 3. Karen officially weaponized small claims court, turning a laughably trivial backyard squabble into a full-blown legal battle. And while it's funny to us, it's also kind of sad, because every hour wasted on this nonsense is an hour the justice system could have spent on someone who actually needed help. But as ridiculous as it was to sue over paint specks, nothing, and I mean nothing, tops the 30-year bombshell Grandma dropped in court. This is where Karen's case truly went from flimsy to flat-out embarrassing.
If this courtroom drama were a Netflix series, this is the episode where you'd gasp, clutch your popcorn, and say, "Oh no, she didn't." Because right when Karen thought she was building momentum, Grandma, cool, calm, and collected, pulled out the ultimate plot twist, a 30-year bombshell. Here's what went down. Karen had been spinning her story like a spider weaving a messy web. According to her, the fence was confusing. It was jointly owned. Maybe 3 different families paid for it. Blah, blah, blah. She was building this fantasy that the fence's history was as mysterious as a lost artifact from Indiana Jones. But then Grandma stepped up and, with the casual confidence of someone who's been around long enough to not tolerate nonsense, dropped the truth. She revealed that she and her late husband had personally paid $4,000 for that fence back in the early 90s. $4,000. And not only did they pay for it, they maintained it through rainstorms, rot, fallen posts, and the endless wear and tear that comes with owning property for 3 decades. She even had documentation and the handyman's testimony to prove it. Suddenly, Karen's elaborate fantasy about shared ownership crumbled faster than a stale cookie. Now let's pause here and put this in perspective. 30 years. That's older than some of the lawyers in the courtroom. That fence has been standing since Bill Clinton was in office, since Friends first aired, since people still use dial-up internet. Grandma wasn't just claiming ownership. She had lived it, breathed it, repaired it, and invested her money into it for 3 solid decades. If fences could talk, this one would have stood up and said, "Yeah, I'm hers. Sit down, Karen." The beauty of this moment wasn't just the facts, it was the delivery. Grandma wasn't angry, she wasn't dramatic, she wasn't spinning stories. She was steady, measured, and matter-of-fact. It was the courtroom equivalent of a mic drop. She didn't even need to raise her voice. She just laid out her receipts, and suddenly the whole room shifted. Karen, on the other hand, you could practically see the panic setting in. Her whole case was built on the idea that she had a claim to this fence. But when the actual owner stood up with a 30-year history of repairs, payments, and upkeep, her arguments turned to dust. It was like watching someone try to argue they invented pizza while standing in Italy. And let's be real, this wasn't just a bombshell, it was a humiliation. because what Karen had framed as a righteous fight for justice was exposed as pure ego. She wasn't protecting her rights. She wasn't standing up against wrongdoing. She was throwing a tantrum over something that wasn't hers. And Grandma's calm testimony made that painfully obvious. Now here's where the comedy kicks in. Karen had been waving around her shaky evidence like it was the smoking gun. Photos of paint specks, hearsay about who might have paid for the fence decades ago, vague claims about shared ownership, but against 30 years of hard facts, it was like trying to fight a tank with a water balloon. Entertaining to watch, sure, but doomed from the start. And you could see the judge's face. You know that look when someone's trying to hide their amusement but can't quite manage it? Yeah, that. Because at this point, the case wasn't just weak, it was laughable. The fence wasn't just Grandma's, it was very obviously Grandma's. She had poured money, labor, and love into it for decades. Karen didn't have a leg to stand on, and everyone in the room knew it. But here's the best part. Grandma didn't gloat. She didn't rub it in. She simply told the truth, presented her evidence, and let the facts speak for themselves. That's the difference between entitlement and integrity. Karen needed drama to feel powerful. Grandma needed nothing but the truth, and it shut the whole circus down. Think about what that says about character. Karen spent all her energy inflating a false narrative, dragging an elderly neighbor into court, and wasting everyone's time. Grandma, meanwhile, had quietly spent 30 years maintaining her property, doing the work, and being a good neighbor. When push came to shove, character won, and it won big. This is why the 30-year bombshell was so satisfying. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was justice in its purest form. It was the universe saying, "Sit down, Karen, you've embarrassed yourself enough." And honestly, it makes you wonder why Karen didn't think this through. Did she really believe no one would ask who paid for the fence? Did she think a judge would just take her word over 30 years of evidence? That's the thing about entitlement. It blinds you. Karen was so wrapped up in being right that she never considered the possibility that she was dead wrong. So here we are. Grandma, armed with facts and dignity, drops the 30-year truth bomb. Karen, armed with entitlement and shaky evidence, looks like she just realized she brought a plastic sword to a real battle. And the audience, us, the lucky viewers, get to watch the whole thing unfold like the world's most entertaining episode of Judge Judy. But if you thought Karen's credibility was in shambles after that bombshell, just wait until you hear about her next move, because nothing screams maturity like pouring dish soap on your neighbor's wet paint. Yes, you heard that right. Welcome to the dish soap sabotage.
Just when you thought Karen couldn't possibly dig the hole any deeper, she whipped out the most cartoonishly petty move of the entire saga. Forget reason, forget dignity, forget even pretending this was about the law. Karen went full middle school drama mode, armed not with logic, not with evidence, but with dish soap. Yes, you heard that right. At one point in this neighborly Cold War, Karen literally poured dish soap on her neighbor's wet paint to sabotage the work. Picture it. Grandma had hired painters, the fence was getting its glow up, and everything was running smoothly. Then here comes Karen, storming in like a villain from a Saturday morning cartoon, armed with a bottle of Dawn. She sloshes it over the fresh paint so the workers couldn't finish. Ladies and gentlemen, we've officially left the realm of legal disputes and entered Looney Tunes territory. Now let's unpack just how ridiculous this is. Imagine being a 67-year-old grandmother trying to maintain your fence, and instead of a normal neighborly disagreement, you've got someone sabotaging your property with household cleaning supplies. Who does that? Seriously, who wakes up in the morning and says, "You know what my plan is today? Not work, not hobbies, not kindness. Nope, I'm going to weaponize dish soap." And the best part? Karen seemed to think this stunt somehow helped her case. As if the judge was going to lean forward, slam the gavel, and say, "Wow, ma'am, your creativity is unmatched. Case closed. You win." No. What actually happened was the judge, the courtroom, and basically anyone with functioning brain cells saw it for what it was: pure, unfiltered pettiness. Now here's the thing about petty moves. They don't solve problems. They just make you look worse. And in this case, they made Karen look like the human embodiment of a bad reality TV villain. Think Real Housewives meets Judge Judy, except with less glamour and way more absurdity. And poor Grandma. This is a woman who just wanted to keep her fence maintained, who had already been dragged into court over nonsense, and now she's got to deal with sabotage? It's a miracle she didn't just throw her hands up and say, "Forget it. Take the fence, take the yard, take the whole house. Clearly, I'm living next to a soap opera." Literally. But let's zoom out and see the bigger picture. Karen's move with the dish soap wasn't just childish. It was symbolic. It showed that her entire fight wasn't really about paint or fences. It was about control. She wanted to make Grandma's life harder, even in the pettiest ways possible. And when someone's willing to pour dish soap on your fence just to spite you, it tells you everything you need to know about their character. Spoiler alert, it's not good. Now let's get into how this looked in court. When the incident was brought up, it wasn't a proud moment for Karen. It wasn't a mic drop revelation. It was humiliating. Because think about it. How do you spin that? How do you stand in front of a judge, straight-faced, and justify sabotaging your neighbor's fence painting with dish soap? What's the legal defense there? "Your Honor, I had to do it. The paint offended me." It's laughable, but it's also sad, because at the heart of it, Karen weaponized immaturity. She took what could have been a simple civil discussion and turned it into a soap-soaked spectacle. And in doing so, she not only embarrassed herself, but also wasted even more of the court's time. But here's the kicker. The painters still finished the job. The soap didn't stop progress. It just made the story even more ridiculous. Grandma's fence got painted, the world kept turning, and Karen's antics became just another entry in the Hall of Fame of bad decisions. If anything, the dish soap stunt just added insult to her already self-inflicted injury. And honestly, you have to admire the sheer creativity of it. Out of all the tools she could have used, words, communication, compromise, Karen went with dish soap. It's like a masterclass in missing the point. If pettiness were an art form, this was her Mona Lisa. The irony, of course, is that all of this ended up being used as evidence against her. Instead of strengthening her case, it shredded what little credibility she had left. The judge didn't see a victim, he saw a saboteur. And Grandma? She came out looking even more dignified in comparison, because while Karen was busy pouring soap, Grandma was busy staying calm, steady, and sensible. So here's the lesson. When you try to fight your neighbor with dish soap, you don't come off as clever, you come off as desperate. And that's exactly what Karen was. Desperate to win a battle she had already lost, clinging to petty stunts when the facts were stacked against her. And honestly, if you wrote this into a TV script, people would say it was too over the top. No one would actually pour dish soap on a fence. But Karen did. And that's what makes this story legendary. But if you think dish soap was the lowest point, buckle up, because next, Karen tried to rewrite history itself, claiming phantom co-owners for the fence that never existed. And trust me, it's as flimsy as it sounds.
By this point, you'd think Karen would have taken the hint. The paint specks didn't stick, the dish soap sabotage backfired, and the 30-year bombshell left her case looking thinner than a slice of gas station pizza. But no, Karen wasn't about to give up. Instead, she pulled a classic Karen move. When the facts don't support your story, just invent new ones. And that's exactly how we ended up with the saga of the phantom co-owners. So here's how it went down. Standing in court, face-to-face with Grandma and the judge, Karen unveiled her next big claim. According to her, the fence wasn't really Grandma's at all. Nope. Apparently, 3 different families had chipped in to build the fence decades ago. That's right. Suddenly, this wasn't just a fence, it was a community project, a shared masterpiece, the Stonehenge of suburban property lines. Karen basically painted it like a neighborhood GoFundMe from the 90s. The problem? She had absolutely zero proof. None. Nada. Zilch. When the judge pressed her, she admitted that this was just something someone had told her. You know, a guy said, or someone mentioned. That was her evidence. Imagine walking into court and saying, "Your Honor, I don't have documents, witnesses, or receipts, but my neighbor's cousin's dog walker once said this fence might have been shared." Yeah, that was the vibe. Meanwhile, Grandma was sitting there with actual receipts, testimony from the handyman, and her own 30-year history of maintaining the fence. So on one side, facts. On the other side, rumors. Guess which one the judge found more convincing? Now let's pause and really appreciate the comedy here. This was Karen's big twist, her ace card, her dramatic reveal, and it fell flatter than a bad punchline at open mic night. If this had been a magic trick, she basically pulled a rabbit out of the hat and it turned out to be a sock puppet. The judge, to his credit, tried to give her a chance. He listened patiently, asked clarifying questions, and waited for something resembling evidence. But when Karen kept circling back to, "Well, that's what I heard," he shut it down faster than a bad internet connection. Because here's the thing. Courts don't run on hearsay. They run on facts. And facts were the one thing Karen didn't have. It's worth pointing out how bold this move was, though. Karen wasn't just wrong. She was rewriting history. She tried to erase 30 years of Grandma's ownership with a flimsy story about phantom co-owners. It's like trying to argue you own the Mona Lisa because you once walked past the Louvre. Nice try, but no. And you know what this really shows? Karen's mindset. She wasn't interested in truth. She was interested in winning. And when winning seemed impossible, she tried to bend reality itself to fit her narrative. Because that's the hallmark of entitlement. If the world doesn't align with your version of events, just invent a new version and demand everyone else play along. But the courtroom isn't Facebook, and you can't just manifest ownership by declaring it loudly. Judges need evidence. And Karen's phantom co-owners were about as real as unicorn landlords. The longer she talked, the weaker her case became, until even she must have realized she was grasping at straws. Meanwhile, Grandma kept her cool. She didn't get rattled, didn't stoop to Karen's level, and didn't even need to raise her voice. She just let Karen dig her own hole. And honestly, it was glorious to watch, because sometimes the best way to win is simply to let the other person keep talking. Think about how humiliating this must have been. Karen walked into court expecting to be taken seriously. Instead, she ended up looking like someone who binge-watched too many legal dramas and thought rumors counted as evidence. If this were Judge Judy, she'd have been roasted in under 30 seconds. If it were Shark Tank, she'd have been told, "I'm out," before she even finished her pitch. But here's the best part. This wasn't just a bad argument. It actively backfired. Because the more Karen leaned into her phantom co-owner story, the clearer it became that she had nothing substantial to stand on. The judge didn't just dismiss her claim, he dismantled it piece by piece until there was nothing left but embarrassment. So what do we take away from this? Simple. If you're going to fight a legal battle, bring receipts. Don't bring rumors. Don't bring gossip. And definitely don't bring "a guy once told me." Because in the end, hearsay isn't evidence. It's just noise. And in Karen's case, it was the loudest, emptiest noise of all. This was the point in the saga where everyone could see the writing on the wall. Karen's case wasn't just weak, it was collapsing. The judge wasn't buying it, Grandma wasn't intimidated, and the phantom co-owners vanished into thin air, just like they always had. But Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. Because when rumors failed, she pivoted to paperwork, and her attempt to spin a property survey turned into one of the funniest fails of the whole trial.
By this stage in the saga, Karen's case was wobbling like a Jenga tower missing half its blocks. She'd already tried the phantom co-owner's defense, and that collapsed faster than a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm.
So what's the next logical step for a Karen backed into a corner? Easy. Bring out the paperwork, or in Karen's case, the lack of it. Welcome to the most anticlimactic moment of the trial, the property survey fail. Here's what happened. Karen, clearly desperate to add some legitimacy to her argument, insisted she had proof that the fence wasn't really Grandma's. She claimed she could show, with official documents, that the property line supported her case. Cue the dramatic music. The courtroom leaned in. Maybe, just maybe, Karen finally had something solid to stand on. But then, plot twist, it turned out her so-called survey wasn't even relevant. It didn't show the fence. It didn't prove ownership. It didn't even line up with her argument. The survey was from before the fence was even built. That's right, she was waving around a piece of paper that basically said, "Yep, this is land." Nothing more. It was the courtroom equivalent of pulling out a grocery list and declaring it Exhibit A. The judge, bless his patience, tried to make sense of it. He asked questions. He asked Karen to point to where the fence was on the survey. But it was like asking someone to find Waldo in a book that didn't have Waldo in it. The fence simply wasn't there. It hadn't been constructed at the time of the survey, which made the entire document about as useful as a snow shovel in the desert. And here's where the comedy really hit home. Karen tried to spin it. She insisted the survey still proved something. She gestured, she argued, she explained in circles. But no matter how much she talked, the facts didn't change. The document didn't say what she wanted it to say. It was a classic Karen move. Confuse the issue with irrelevant details, hoping people wouldn't notice. Unfortunately for her, judges tend to notice. Let's pause here and break down how ridiculous this was. Imagine getting pulled over for speeding and showing the officer your library card as proof you weren't breaking the law. That's the level of disconnect we're dealing with here. Karen had brought the wrong weapon to the fight, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, Grandma just sat there, cool as ever, watching Karen flail. She didn't need to object, didn't need to interrupt, didn't even need to raise her eyebrows. The facts were on her side, and Karen was doing all the work of sinking her own ship. It was like watching a magician pull off a trick that instantly backfires, except the trick was just, look at this paper, and the backfire was instant humiliation. And the judge, you could tell he was done. You know that look parents give when their kid insists the dog ate their homework, but the dog is sitting right there with a guilty face? That was the vibe. The judge politely entertained Karen's explanation, but you could practically hear his internal monologue. Lady, I went to law school for this? Is this how I spend my Tuesday afternoon? Listening to someone misread their own survey? This is the thing about Karen logic. It doesn't require evidence, it just requires confidence. And Karen had confidence in spades. She presented that survey like it was a smoking gun, even though it was really just a blank cap pistol. She banked on the idea that if she acted certain enough, maybe the judge would overlook the glaring hole in her case. But that's not how courts work. You can't fake it till you make it when property lines are on the line. The funniest part? Karen even offered to email the survey over later, as if that would change anything. She admitted she wasn't sure how to send it, asked for addresses, and stumbled through the logistics like a teenager trying to print homework at the last minute. This wasn't the confident slam dunk she had imagined. It was a slow-motion train wreck, and the whole courtroom was forced to watch. Now, let's talk about symbolism. The survey debacle wasn't just about paperwork. It perfectly captured the essence of Karen's entire case. All presentation, no substance. She strutted into court with confidence, waved around her evidence, and demanded to be taken seriously. But when you scratched beneath the surface, there was nothing there. Just rumors, hearsay, and irrelevant papers. The survey fiasco wasn't an accident. It was the natural conclusion of a case built on smoke and mirrors. And here's where Grandma shined yet again. When asked about her own documents, she admitted the limitations honestly. She explained calmly what her survey showed and what it didn't. She didn't spin, didn't exaggerate, didn't play games. That honesty contrasted so starkly with Karen's performance that it made the truth even clearer. One side was rooted in reality. The other was rooted in fantasy. So what do we learn from fact 7? Simple. Paperwork only works if it actually says what you think it says. Otherwise, you just end up embarrassing yourself in front of a judge, your neighbor, and anyone else unlucky enough to witness the spectacle. Karen thought she had a trump card. Instead, she revealed her hand, and it was nothing but blanks.
By this point in the courtroom circus, most people would have thrown in the towel. Karen's claims had been smacked down harder than a kid's drone hitting a tree. The phantom co-owners vanished, the survey failed, the dish soap sabotage turned into a bad punchline. But Grandma? She wasn't done. She had one more card to play. And it was the kind of everyday, practical brilliance that makes petty drama collapse like a house of cards. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the unsung hero of this entire saga, the power washer. Yes, the power washer. That humble piece of hardware you usually rent from Home Depot to blast grime off your driveway suddenly became Exhibit A in the case of Grandma versus Karen. Because when Karen made her dramatic, Oscar-worthy claims about paint specks ruining her life, Grandma didn't argue, she didn't stomp her feet, she didn't pour dish soap in retaliation. She grabbed her power washer, turned it on, and cleaned the whole thing off in minutes. Problem solved. And the beauty of it? She admitted it in court with the same calm tone you'd use to describe watering your plants. While Karen was spiraling into conspiracy theories, Grandma casually explained that she went outside on a warm November day, hooked up her washer, and scrubbed off the smudges. Done. Fixed. Game over. You could almost hear the entire courtroom exhale in relief. But Karen? She wasn't relieved. She was furious. Because in her mind, this wasn't just Grandma fixing a problem, it was Grandma destroying her evidence. You know, the evidence she had been waving around like it was Watergate. Karen testified that Grandma spent a whole hour power washing the fence, and she sat there filming her like she was creating the pilot episode for Making a Mess, the Fence Files. She thought she had captured a smoking gun. What she really captured was a 67-year-old woman showing everyone how easy it is to solve a non-problem. Now let's talk symbolism, because this moment was poetic. The power washer wasn't just a cleaning tool, it was justice in spray form. While Karen tried to inflate a molehill into a mountain, Grandma literally blasted the molehill into nothing. It was the courtroom equivalent of saying, "See this problem? Watch me erase it in real time." And that's exactly what she did. The irony is brutal. Karen wanted to frame herself as the victim of paint vandalism, the neighbor whose property had been defiled. But Grandma's solution exposed the truth. There was never any real damage. There was just drama. And once the paint specks were gone, the whole case looked as flimsy as it always was. Here's the kicker, though. Karen actually thought filming Grandma cleaning the fence made her look guilty. She tried to spin it in court like, "Look, Your Honor, she was out there power washing. This proves she knew she was wrong." But what it actually proved was the opposite. Grandma cared enough to fix even the smallest issues, and Karen cared enough to sit on her porch filming for an hour instead of, living her life. One of these things screams responsible adult, the other screams neighborhood nuisance. And think about how telling that is. When confronted with a problem, Grandma solved it. When confronted with the same problem, Karen recorded it. That's the difference between maturity and entitlement. One takes action, the other takes videos. If this were a boxing match, the scoreboard would read, Grandma, points for efficiency, Karen, points for excessive screen time. Let's not overlook the comic side of this. Imagine being the judge listening to Karen describe her neighbor power washing as though it were a felony. She actually described it with a level of seriousness you'd reserve for an armed robbery. Meanwhile, the judge is probably sitting there thinking, "Lady, she cleaned a fence. What do you want me to do? Throw her in jail for being too tidy?" This moment also revealed just how far gone Karen's logic really was. Because if your case depends on framing basic household chores as criminal activity, you don't have a case, you have a complaint. And complaints aren't lawsuits, they're just noise. Grandma's power washer, on the other hand, turned into the ultimate mic drop. No raised voices, no cheap tricks, no theatrics, just a steady stream of water cutting through all the nonsense.
And in that moment, you could almost feel the balance of the courtroom shift. Karen had dragged everyone into a battle over paint specks, and Grandma calmly proved it was never worth the fight. Here's the thing. A power washer doesn't just clean, it exposes. It strips away layers of dirt, grime, and in this case, entitlement. And once the noise was stripped away, the truth stood clear. Grandma owned the fence, Grandma maintained the fence, and Grandma fixed the fence. Case dismissed. So, while Karen filmed with the intensity of a TMZ paparazzi, Grandma simply went about her business, showing everyone what real responsibility looks like. That's why this moment will go down as legendary. Not because it was flashy, but because it was so simple. In the end, it wasn't lawyers or arguments or surveys that buried Karen's case. It was a 67-year-old grandma with a power washer. But if you thought a power washer was satisfying, just wait, because the judge was about to drop the ultimate hammer, and it turned Karen's case into nothing more than courtroom confetti.
Every courtroom drama needs its climax. You know that moment in movies where the judge slams the gavel, the music swells, and the guilty party gasps in disbelief? Well, this wasn't Hollywood, but it might as well have been. Because after hours of listening to Karen's soap opera about phantom owners, paint specks, and dish soap sabotage, the judge finally had enough. And when he dropped his decision, it landed with all the force of a thunderclap. Here's what happened. After carefully reviewing the testimony, the photos, and every bit of evidence and non-evidence thrown his way, the judge came to the only conclusion he could. The fence belonged to Grandma. Period. Case dismissed. No cause of action. And just like that, Karen's entire lawsuit was buried deeper than a time capsule in a middle school playground. Let's pause to savor this moment. Karen had strutted into that courtroom like she was the star witness in a high-profile trial. She treated the paint flecks like they were radioactive waste, the dish soap sabotage like a masterstroke of brilliance, and the phantom co-owners like her ace in the hole. But none of it mattered. The judge saw right through the smoke and mirrors. He boiled it down to the facts. Grandma owned the fence. Grandma paid for the fence. Grandma maintained the fence for 30 decades. End of story. And the beauty of it? The judge didn't even need to get dramatic. He didn't raise his voice, didn't scold, didn't lecture. He just laid it out plain and simple, with a kind of steady authority that cuts deeper than any rant. That's what made it sting even more. Karen wasn't shouted down. She was calmly dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing of her case remained. Now, let's imagine what was going through Karen's head in that moment. She'd invested all this time, energy, and emotional fireworks into dragging her neighbor to court. She probably rehearsed her lines in the mirror, printed out her photos like they were FBI exhibits, and convinced herself that justice was on her side. And then, boom! All of it tossed aside in a single ruling. If looks could kill, that courtroom would have needed a hazmat team to clean up the steam coming off her glare. Meanwhile, Grandma? She sat there in quiet victory. No fist pumps, no cheers, no smug, "I told you so," just the satisfaction of truth winning out. She didn't need to gloat because the ruling said it all. 30 years of stewardship, dignity, and patience had spoken louder than any of Karen's antics ever could. And let's not overlook what this ruling represented. This wasn't just about offense. It was about the court drawing a line in the sand against weaponized pettiness. The judge made it clear that not every complaint belongs in front of a gavel. Courts are meant to handle real disputes, not serve as the stage for neighborhood melodramas. By dismissing the case outright, the judge didn't just vindicate Grandma, he sent a message, "Stop wasting our time." The satisfaction here is universal. Who hasn't dealt with a neighbor who takes things too far? Who hasn't rolled their eyes at someone making mountains out of molehills? Watching Karen's case implode wasn't just entertaining, it was cathartic. It was every petty neighbor dispute you've ever endured, resolved in the most glorious way possible, with the truth on full display and the nonsense tossed out with the trash. But let's be honest, the best part was the finality.
There was no wiggle room, no let's revisit this later, no drawn-out appeals. The judge shut it down completely. He didn't just poke holes in Karen's case, he flattened it, and that's why the gavel drop felt so powerful. It wasn't just a ruling, it was a reality check. Now, picture this like a scoreboard. On one side, Karen, 0 points, 1 broken ego, and a reputation as the neighborhood's drama queen. On the other side, Grandma, victory by knockout, dignity intact, and a freshly cleaned fence to boot. If this were a sports game, the commentators would have called it a blowout. And here's the kicker. Karen had no comeback. There was nothing left to argue. No survey to wave around, no phantom neighbors to call upon, no soap bottles to wield. The gavel dropped, the decision was final, and all Karen could do was pack up her papers and leave. For someone who thrived on control, that loss of power must have been brutal. The courtroom scene ended not with fireworks, but with silence. The kind of silence that only comes when truth speaks louder than noise. Grandma walked away vindicated, Karen walked away defeated, and the rest of us walked away with the sweet satisfaction of watching justice done in the simplest, most elegant way possible. But as satisfying as the judge's ruling was, it also raised a bigger question. Why do courts even have to waste time on cases like this? And the answer says a lot about how entitlement clogs up the system.
Every great courtroom saga leaves us with a lesson. Some teach us about justice. Some teach us about resilience. And this one? Well, this one teaches us that courts should never, ever have to babysit neighborhood drama. Because let's be honest, the fact that this case even made it in front of a judge is proof that the system sometimes gets hijacked by pure pettiness. Think about it. Small claims courts are designed to resolve real issues, unpaid debts, damaged property, disputes over actual money. They're supposed to help regular people get justice without spending thousands on lawyers. But instead of serving that noble purpose, this court was forced to deal with Karen's meltdown over paint specks and phantom fence ownership. That's like showing up at the emergency room with a paper cut and demanding immediate surgery. Technically possible, sure, but ridiculous. The judge himself even hinted at the absurdity of it all. After sifting through hours of testimony and photos of wood planks, he acknowledged how trivial the whole thing was. This wasn't fraud. This wasn't theft. This wasn't even a real property dispute. It was one neighbor weaponizing the legal system to inflate her own sense of control. And in the process, she wasted not just Grandma's time, but everyone else's too. Now here's the kicker. Cases like this aren't rare. Courts across the country get clogged with thousands of frivolous claims every year. Neighbors suing neighbors over tree branches, over grass height, over Christmas lights. It's the HOA mentality gone nuclear. I don't like it, therefore I must control it. And while it's funny on YouTube, in reality, it slows down the system for people who actually need help. Every hour a judge spends refereeing Karen's soap opera is an hour someone else doesn't get justice. So what's the solution? Some argue that people who bring frivolous lawsuits should face penalties, fines, fees, even bans on filing again for a while. Because honestly, if you're wasting court time with paint specks, maybe your wallet should take the hit. Others say public humiliation is enough. After all, Karen didn't just lose the case, she became the internet's latest punchline. And let's be real, going viral as the poster child for entitlement probably stings worse than any fine. But beyond punishment, there's a bigger cultural issue here: entitlement. The belief that the world should bend to your will, that every inconvenience is an injustice, that you're always the victim. Karen didn't sue because she was harmed. She sued because she wanted control. And that's the danger. Because when entitlement gets mixed with access to courts, you don't get justice, you get chaos. And Grandma's role in all this is she's the reminder of what maturity looks like. She didn't escalate. She didn't retaliate with lawsuits of her own. She simply defended herself with facts, dignity, and yes, a trusty power washer.
She represented the thousands of neighbors who just want to be left in peace, who want fairness without theatrics. Her calm presence in that courtroom was the antidote to Karen's chaos. Now, let's step back and frame this for the viewers at home. If you've ever had a neighbor who nitpicks, complains, or tries to control every square inch of the block, you know exactly why this story hits so hard. Karen isn't just one woman. She's a symbol of every HOA tyrant, every nosy neighbor, every petty complainer who makes life harder than it needs to be. And watching her lose in court isn't just satisfying, it's vindication. It's proof that sometimes common sense still wins. The bigger question, though, is this. Should courts continue to act as referees for neighborhood squabbles? Or is it time to raise the bar? Maybe judges should have the power to dismiss nonsense cases right at the door, before they waste everyone's time. Or maybe we need community mediators who can handle these disputes before they escalate into courtroom drama. Because let's face it, the justice system was not designed to settle paint speck wars. At the end of the day, this case gave us entertainment, but it also gave us perspective. It showed how entitlement can weaponize even the smallest issues, how courts can get dragged into absurdity, and how dignity, quiet, steady, unshaken dignity, can win against chaos. Karen wanted the system to validate her pettiness. Instead, the system exposed it. And that's the kind of justice we can all get behind. So here's the final takeaway. Courts shouldn't babysit drama. They shouldn't be the stage for petty grievances dressed up as legal battles. But when they do get dragged into it, may every Karen meet their match in a grandma with receipts, resilience, and a power washer. Because nothing buries entitlement faster than the truth and a gavel drop to seal the deal.